Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Now, most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to me talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing right now, which is getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy. You can save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. For casual insurance company affiliates, national annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Folks, bodyguards, cases, and screens protect your phone so you don't have to worry. Phones are expensive. They run our whole lives. Why are they so fragile? Bodyguards is proving that cases and screens don't have to be big, bulky, or thick to be protective. Bodyguards has been protecting phones and mobile devices for almost 20 years, and the cases are slim and pocket-friendly. They've got tons of colors and styles to choose from, and since they're all designed by the Bodyguards team in the U.S., they're built for both protection and style in mind. When you buy from Bodyguards, a portion of your purchase supports their charity foundation. It's called Relief Haven, which gives back to the local community as well as abroad to help children in Africa escape child labor and gain an education and self-reliance. Remember, when a screen protector breaks, it's saving your phone. Bodyguards knows this, so they offer free replacements for the life of your device. You only pay shipping. Go to bodyguards.com/welcome. That's bodyguards with a Z to protect your phone today. That's bodyguards with a Z at the end.com/welcome to start protecting your valuable phone today. We salute our friends at Pluralsight, the tech workforce development company, and celebrate their mission to improve and diversify the world's technology workforce. Harness the collective power of hindsight, foresight, and insight with Pluralsight. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a very special guest, a returning guest, popular YouTuber Blaire White. She's the host of the new podcast, The Blaire White Project. Yours truly got to be the first guest. She's got I screwed this up the second time. She's got over 1 million subs on YouTube, so you should follow her there on Instagram, Twitter, everywhere else. Blaire, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
So what do you mean by special?
You know what I mean. Short bus.
Oh, okay. So first of all, you have cursed me. So for people who don't know, Michael makes fun of me for a lot of things, but my nails are the biggest thing. 20 seconds before sitting down to do this, I lost a nail, and you always make fun of me that I never have 10 nails on. Literally a few seconds before I sat down.
Yeah, but you could still count to 10.
Barely.
So I want to talk to you because Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman, has been getting a lot of accolades. There's a book with the same regard. You watched it. You made a video about it. You gave it 4.9 out of 5 stars. I watched it as well. I thought it was very well done. So we're going to start with the first question. What is a woman?
An adult human female, and a trans woman is an adult human male who presents as a woman.
So one of the things you and I talk about often, or you talk about in your videos and in your interviews, is you seem to be feeling that because of so much of this push to push trans issues anywhere and everywhere, especially with kids, this is causing a big backlash towards, average Americans against those who would otherwise be accepting of LGBT issues. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it just shows in the numbers. LGBT acceptance has been declining for the first time in almost a decade. And I don't think it takes really a super intuitive person to understand that there's a lot of things that are being shoved in people's faces that are illogical, like the trans athlete thing, like the trans kid thing. I think that what the right gets wrong is that they assume that transgenderism or transsexualism is an invention of the modern left or of postmodernism. That's not the case. Trans people have been around forever. And you know that because you're more well-versed in LGBT history than I am. But I understand the misconception because, like every other group, the left, co-ops them and then turns it into some crazy shit. But the problem with this group in particular is that most trans people just want to get on. Like they have, not a lot of them are public figures. They're not outspoken. And you definitely risk your entire social group as a trans person by speaking out against this stuff, because most trans people only hang out with other trans people. So they've co-opted a group that isn't actually willing to speak up for themselves. The kid thing is a big thing. And the movie honed in on that, which, I rated it a 4.9 because I felt like it was full of useful information. I learned from it, and I'm someone who's very well versed in this stuff. So for me to actually learn new things, that's a little bit rare. So I really enjoyed the movie. I know that Matt Walsh is a super contentious figure, but so am I. And I think a conversation is probably overdue for Matt and I. I think currently we follow each other, but I think he kind of pretends like I don't exist. I'm pretty sure I have the most viewed review of his movie that exists on the internet. And he was like quote tweeting people with like 1,000 views on their review. So I'm like, I know you saw it, Matt. So I think a conversation should happen. I don't really know how he feels about trans adults, because I think that's a separate conversation than 12-year-olds going on, permanent medicalization. So it'd be interesting.
So I want to talk to you about someone who's actually have experience with these issues, about some of the claims that are being made, and both your perspective and your kind of informed experience. Isn't it true that puberty blockers, which is what they're giving to kids to prevent those who identify as trans as kids from achieving puberty, is a temporary thing? It's just like pressing pause on a YouTube video, and if the kid changes his mind later, they can just unpause it and they can go through puberty just normal like everybody else.
Not true at all. And that's probably the wildest claim. There's a lot of gaslighting that goes on, as Dave Rubin would say, on this topic. There's a lot of things that are said that about 2 years after they're said and they're the main talking point, they just kind of disappear. They'll tell you something isn't happening. So for years they were saying, no kids are actually medically transitioning. It's just social transitioning. Who would have a problem with kids dressing up? I don't really have a problem with kids dressing up, but that's not the truth. Puberty blockers are definitely not they're not temporary. I mean, there are some temporary aspects. So if you go off of them, you will start puberty, but the idea that starting puberty, if you decide to go off them at 15, is going to be the same as if you naturally had it occur at 12 or 13 is just not the case. There's a lot of studies showing that there's osteoporosis that takes place. Your height is stunted. Your ability to reproduce is stunted. And that's especially true with hormone replacement therapy, which always follows the puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are temporary only in the sense that you take them for a short amount of time, but the effects are lasting. And this is a drug, which is Lupron. This is a drug that has been historically used to castrate pedophiles. So the idea that it's the sort of like mainstream consensus now that this is a drug appropriate for children for the sake of altering their bodies permanently is very scary. And I think that eventually it's going to come to a tipping point where people kind of look back at this as one of the most heinous things to come out of the medical community in decades. But until that happens, I think there's going to be a lot of kids really messed up from it. And you're already seeing it. I've interviewed a ton of detransitioners on my channel. I was one of the people who kind of pushed that topic to the forefront. My most popular videos I've created are on that topic, talking to these kids who have gone through this medicalization and they've tried to turn back, they've tried to stop, and there's just so many permanent effects, whether it's the voice, whether it's the height, whether it's when you transition at a very young age, and I'm sorry if I'm answering too many questions at once, but when you transition at a very young age, you never achieve sexual gratification. And when you talk about that, what the supporters of children transitioning will say is, well, why are you concerned with whether or not they can have sexual gratification? As if that's not a very important, healthy part of being a human being. And then obviously you're sterilized as well through this medicalization. I transitioned as an adult and I can't have kids. So
well, you're saying obviously, but I don't think it is obvious. I don't think people put two and two together that if someone has transitioned as a kid or, blocked their puberty and later they change it, they might permanently have lost their ability to have children of their own. And this is something that, from my experience with you, you're telling me that these kids aren't, or their parents even aren't being informed that this is a possible side effect, correct?
Yeah, I'm absolutely wrong to say it's obvious. I think it's obvious to me because I'm so involved in this topic, in this world, but you're right, it's not so obvious, but that's unfortunate. The reality is there's these stories from these young kids that come out that are just like the most insane stories, and they're true, of the problems with getting these surgeries at a young age. The place that I transitioned at in Plano, Texas, this is Texas, by the way, I was there recently taking my friend to take care of her while she got her surgery. She's an adult. And I was informed that they were doing operations on kids as young as 14. And then Sydney Watson further looked into that same clinic, and it's actually 12 that they're doing double mastectomies on underage girls. So this is something that people are absolutely going to look back on as something that's horrible. And the people who supported it, I think, are eventually going to have to pretend like they didn't, because talk about being on the wrong side of history. I rarely invoke that argument, but when it comes to like permanently disfiguring kids, like I think there is a right and wrong side of history on that topic.
Well, so the argument is, if these kids aren't getting what they call gender affirming surgeries, these kids are going to be suicidal. And by preventing them from getting these surgeries that their gender dysphoria tells them, you are the one who is abusing the kid.
Right. You're the abuser if you think that that's too young for these kids to be medicalized for life, which I won't say it's obvious, but a reminder that it is a medicalization for life. I'm on estrogen for the rest of my life, minus, I think, the age when it's appropriate that biological women go on menopause. I think that I'm supposed to slow it down, but not cut it off. I'll figure that out when I'm older, I guess. But yeah, you're called the abuser if you disagree with it. But in reality, the lawsuits that are going to come out of this, I think you told me this a while ago, and I kind of thought about it. I was like, you're so right. The lawsuits that come out of this are going to be just giant. I mean, you can't completely destroy a healthy body and think that there's no like recourse, whether it's politically or, lawsuits.
One of the things that was passed as the law in California is that if you are someone who's having issues with your gender and go to therapy, it is illegal for the therapist to discourage you from transitioning.
Yeah.
So the argument is, isn't that important? Because otherwise you're going to have the equivalent of kind of, pray the gay way stuff, and you're going to be causing only more ideological suffering. What is wrong with that law, in your opinion?
Well, this is the thing. It's so what you have now, which has actually historically never existed when it came to diagnosing people as trans. And my dear friend Buck Angel can attest to this, talk about this all the time. What we now have is affirmative care. And you have affirmative therapists, gender affirming therapists, who are literally there, and their sole purpose is to say, yes, you are correct, you're transgender under any and all circumstances, because it is seen as conversion therapy to say anything but that. When in reality, I think you can kind of look at it the complete opposite way, which really is the big deal with all of this. Just like you said, you're the abuser if you disagree, it's backwards for them. I think it's conversion therapy to tell a possibly young gay or lesbian, gender nonconforming, tomboy or feminine boy, that they must be transgender, or they must assume a different gender identity simply because they have those traits. When in reality, I guess it's a bit difficult to understand if you've never had gender dysphoria, but it's a lot deeper than like, I like pink, or I like to play sports, but I'm a girl. But that's what these kids are being told. And if you push back at all, you're seen as participating in conversion therapy, which it's one of those things no one wants to be complicit with. You think of conversion therapy with gay people, and this is something that most people have come to understand is a very horrible thing. Tons of abuses in that industry, for lack of a better word, and it doesn't work flat out. But in the past, when it came to diagnosing people as trans, which entails permanent surgeries and permanent lifelong medicalization, there was a process that entailed pushback. There was a process that entailed, well, you may be misconstruing these feelings based on childhood traumas. And now the idea that being trans has anything to do with childhood traumas, that's very taboo, and therapists simply don't do it. So, there's a lot of issues. It's like a perfect storm. You have all these kids, the extreme spike in people identifying as transgender. I don't have the numbers on me, but those numbers are always thrown around. It's because there's no safeguards anymore. And when there's no safeguards, there's going to be malpractice. And when there's malpractice, there's going to be people's lives ruined. And potentially, like being trans in general, the concept, like adults transitioning, having that freedom to do what they want with their bodies, I could foresee being threatened. I could foresee a situation where the pendulum swings so far that suddenly it becomes illegal to transition as an adult, and we have sort of state by state laws similar to how we do to abortion. I don't want that, obviously, because I believe adults can do what they want, but I think people are going to start conflating the kid and the adult issue and just say to hell with all of it, which is going to be an issue.
One of the things, I'm a little older than you, obviously a lot older than you, but growing up, I think pretty much every girl I knew, girl as a teenager, had a eating disorder phase. It was, usually mild one, they outgrow it. It's not, people who don't understand, it's not about literally the eating disorder. It's about control, losing sense of control in your home, feeling a sense of control of your changing body. This is extremely common. But nowadays, and I really would like to hear your input if I'm completely talking out of my ass. It feels like, okay, if you are a young female or young male who feels uncomfortable with their body, like right away you're told, oh, you're comfortable with your body, you're trans. The difference within eating disorder is you can go back to having a healthy approach to food or a healthier approach to food. You stop making yourself throw up or taking laxatives. You start eating more, maybe getting healthier food choices. But if you are transitioning when you're taking hormones, getting surgeries, that is much more irreversible than, fixing an eating disorder. Do you see these parallels as kind of, this is like the 2.0 version of having anorexia, or am I just completely crazy?
You're not crazy at all, at least not for that. It's absolutely true. And this is why you see the rise in transgenderism within that same population of teenage girls that suffer with eating disorders, body image. It used to be completely flipped, that the trans issue was something that afflicted young boys at a rate that was almost double young girls. Now it's the opposite. If that's not suspicious in the slightest to people, I don't really know what they're thinking. But when it comes to the eating disorder thing, I have seen people say that, allowing someone to transition and assume this new body or this, new gender, at least in the way they present, it's similar to if we were to just say, yeah, continue to strive yourself, continue to present that way and be skin and bones and whatever. And I don't blame people for having that perspective because I understand where they're coming from. However, this is why I think that transition is a last resort. When I decided to transition, it was a last resort. If I could have been happy and healthy living as a boy and presenting as a boy and being seen that way, I would have chosen that in a heartbeat, which is why the idea that jumping to transition as the first resort is incredibly problematic. I pretty much sat myself down and had a real come to Jesus moment when I decided to transition and said, is this something that I could do without in my life? Could I figure out a way to navigate this life without it? I couldn't. But I also made that decision as an adult who can foresee the future, and I started to plan my future, whereas these children cannot. So they might come to the same conclusion, but that's because they're children, not because they have an extreme version of dysphoria. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit graphic, because there's an issue people tap dance about, and this was brought up in the documentary, which is this: that if someone decides that they're trans, the next thing that they do, and they're going to the doctor and having their genital cut off. What is wrong with that kind of view of gender dysphoria?
Well, I can't say what this first step is with all these this new wave of people that are trans coming in. That might be the first thing they jump to.
I'm sorry. I just, how is that different from someone saying I'm trans disabled, cut off my arm?
Oh, okay. I know what you mean now.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to an extent it's not. I personally, and this is where a lot of trans people think I'm crazy, I don't want that operation ever. I do see that as something incredibly brutal to do to yourself. I do kind of see it in the same way of hacking off an arm, because that's a healthy organ that exists there for a reason. And some people are very lucky with the results of the surgery. Some people are not. I guess the argument would be, in a perfect world where the science is all there, you can have a healthy functioning vagina, although it's a neo-vagina. So it's not the same as if you were to cut off your arm and then suddenly you don't have an arm to grab things and go about your day, or a leg to walk. So these things are a lot more detrimental to your existence than that. But I mean, this new wave of trans people, I don't know what it's going to be, but I also know that a lot of trans women in particular do not get the surgery. I would say 90% of the trans women I know don't get it, don't have a plan to get it. Some of them lie and say they do have it, because for some reason people seem to get more respect if they have that surgery, or at least to them, they think they'll get that. But I mean, I'm avoiding that surgery at all costs. And also, this is another thing. One thing I really took away from the movie is transitioning from male to female is so much less brutal than female to male. In the sense of, when I transitioned, I never removed anything. I only added, really. Whereas when you're a young girl and you're going in, you're removing bodily parts. The surgery, even though it's so flawed for male to female genitals, is so much more flawed for female to male. And I got the feeling, although this could have been the bias of the movie, that there are a lot more health complications that come along with transitioning from female to male than the other way around. There was someone interviewed in the movie talking about how every other month they have a life-threatening infection they have to deal with. And it was crazy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that argument. So the argument is basically, if you get this, what they call bottom surgery, it's indistinguishable from someone who'd been born female and having those genitalia, and the science is there, so they can do it, and you're fine like the next day. Like, is that an accurate representation of the state of affairs?
Well, no, that's the other problem. You mentioned earlier that these people that are transitioning, both adults and children, are not getting the proper information, because it's not as if when you go to get their surgery, they tell you, this is not going to be a vagina. This is going to be a neo-vagina. And here's the things that come along with that. Here are the, I think that there is this fantastical sort of perception of it that you literally can switch your sex through this surgery. And this is literally not the case. In 2022, at least, who knows what they're going to have in 2080, you know what I mean? But as of now, what you're getting is a wound that resembles a vagina, that it is your responsibility to keep open. And I don't know how graphic you want to get. We can get as graphic as you want, describing how to do that.
Yeah. Well, how do you keep
the same thing?
How do you keeping the wound open?
Yeah, you have to put, I don't want to get you demonetized, toys inside of you almost daily for a very long time.
So this is something that I feel is obviously common knowledge. It has to be common knowledge among people who've had this surgery, but this is something that's not discussed when Good Morning America or Fox even starts talking about trans kids. So someone who has this surgery, who has gone from male to female, it's not literally a female organ. It is a wound, and the body wants to heal that wound, and they have to take steps on a daily basis to make sure this wound does not heal itself and resolve.
Yes. And there's so much that goes along with that, like infections. We just want to get real graphic. You have to have electrolysis on your male genitalia before you turn it into female genitalia, because if you have even one or even a few hairs left on that part of your body, what they do is they flip it inside out. So you're going to have hairs growing inside of it. And listen, I'm not going to pretend as if the results are always just so heinous, because I've seen decent results on friends. I know people that have had decent results, but the reality is it's far from perfect. And I would say most people that I know that have gotten it have encountered some sort of complication. But that's not the case with so many other surgeries, right? Like, we have so many surgeries that you get it and you're good and there's no problems. But with this one, there seems to always just be problems. And you're right. Good Morning America, the corporate media, the way they present trans kids is they do this very fluffed up, very inspirational, very, how could you ever think this kid needs to be anything other than trans sort of story. And there's so much ugliness that goes along with transition. And it's like, I think that people just don't understand what they're putting kids through when they do it. And what's crazy is that now these kids are coming out, and now these like 17, 18-year-olds that are already going back on their decision to transition, are able to talk about it. So, and it's crazy kind of knowing that was going to happen for years, because I started talking about this like years ago when no one was talking about it. And there really were not a lot of them, but I said, watch, in 2 or 3 years, you're going to have all these kids coming out. It's going to be a huge scandal. And now that's what's happening now. Now you have Tucker Carlson doing interviews with detransitioners, which I think is great. And I think that the right has been absolutely justified in going hard on this issue, because it is absolutely insane. I mean, the idea that kids were anything to do with trans in the past would have been seen as like ludicrous. And I think it's a lot easier for people to understand adults doing what they want with their body than kids.
Whether you're a smoker or an ex-smoker who still struggles with cravings, Fume is the perfect tool for you. Quitting smoking is the best thing you could do for your health, and Fume can help you get there. Fume is a natural inhaler designed for a better, safer, and natural way to quit cigarettes. No smoke, no vape, no nicotine replacement. What it replaces is that hand-to-mouth habit of smoking, which is that ritual, which is so hard for so many people to break. Fume is made of 100% Canadian maple. They have these cores infused with plant oils that are studied to curb cravings. Guys, smoking's expensive. At the very least, you're going to be saving yourself a lot of money. Quitting is tough, but Fume can really help. And they've got thousands of 5-star reviews from smokers who tried everything else, and this works. It's time to create positive habits and quit naturally. Fume. And I'm glad to be a part of helping to make it easier. You're going to save on cigarettes you aren't buying. You're not going to have to buy breath mints. Your teeth won't be as yellow when you save on your initial purchase of Fume. If you head to breathefume.com/malice, BREATHEFUM.com/malice, use promo code malice, you get 10% off your order. That's 10% off your entire order when you head to BREATHEFUM.com/malice and use code malice. Folks, you ever feel like you're being followed on the internet? Maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you. Well, our sponsor, IPVanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help become anonymous on the internet. IPVanish is a virtual private network, a VPN for short, and it's an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use a VPN on your computers, tablets, phones, even your Fire Stick if you stream media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted. What you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching, what you're doing. And that's important because what you're doing on the internet is no one's business but yours. And for listeners of the show, IPVanish is offering an incredible 65% off their annual plan. It's only $375 a month. IPVanish is super easy to use. Turn it on with one click. It runs in the background, helping to protect you while you're browsing the web. And if you run into a problem, boomers, no worries. IPVanish has 24/7 support by email, chat, and phone. Go to IPVanish.com/malice. Use promo code malice. MALICE to claim your 65% off savings. Their annual plan, just $44.99 for the first year with our exclusive discount. This is the time to sign up because with our discount and their current promotion, you can get a VPN for 65% off the usual offering. And IPVanish is the best with a 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with more than 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's IPVanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting yourself online. Let's get back to the show. Okay, so let's push back a little bit. Like, here's a criticism of you that I've seen. That you're a hypocrite. You were on Rogan when saying that you were 4 or 5 when you first had these issues of gender dysphoria. If you had gotten your puberty blockers, you wouldn't have had to have some of these surgeries. And basically, you're denying to other people what it would have been beneficial if you yourself had it, and you have internalized transphobia.
Yeah, this is like the big one that people think they just totally have me on, because on Rogan, he asked me, when did you start feeling different? And I said around 4 or 5, because what I've said since the beginning of my career when talking about this is an issue I've been very consistent on, by the way, is the trans kid thing. What I've said that my story is that, of course, I felt different at that age because trans people kind of always do. Like, just because I'm talking about kids that are getting funneled into this thing incorrectly doesn't mean there aren't actual trans people. Buck Angel has the same story. He felt that way, and he also disagrees with kids transitioning. I could have felt it in my bone marrow that I wanted to transition. That does not mean that I should have been allowed to. That doesn't mean I was able to consent to it. That does not mean, with all the chaos of even just a regular upbringing in childhood, that I would have also added in, I'm medically transitioning, and that would not have been disastrous for me. If you want to be real, there are kids that get sexual urges very, very young. Does that mean they can consent to sex just because they have those urges or those desires or those feelings? No. Is it different? Yes. Is it kind of similar if you think about it? Kind of. It comes down to whether or not a kid can consent to something. And I don't think permanent body modification is one of those things.
One of the things I am concerned about as well is there's a huge swath of the population, and this is a big narrative just across corporate media, that people don't respond to incentives. Like, they just basically pretend that whoever advocates for something is doing something of coming from a place of truth. This is completely, in my opinion, the exact opposite of how human beings behave. The statement people tend to respond to incentives is not only true, it's tautological. It's irrefutable. That's what incentive means, something that encourages people to act in a certain behavior. The glorification of like trans people in the media, Pride Month, it's kind of everywhere. Oh, look, we found one. Let's put her on the box of Trident. Or, it was really kind of funny. I was taking an Uber and there was some radio DJ, and it was Pride Month sponsored by Tide, like detergent. And it was like, this is like I remember I talked to Michael Alec, who was the club kid killer, when I visited him in jail, and he was doing these talk shows before he was, outed as a killer. And he was just like when they were interviewing us on these shows, he's like, I knew they were just there to sell detergent. Like, it had nothing to do with whatever the freak show was on the panel. It was just there and the fact that it was literally Tide sponsoring this. But my issue is, if there is such a glorification of trans identity, my concern is a lot of these moms who are, for them, having a trans kid's like winning the lottery, because right away their kid is more special than everybody else. They can make all sorts of demands. They can kind of be that Karen demanding the entire school run around them and their needs, and it gives them a sense of power. That to me is a big problem. Am I just, from, in your opinion, is that something I'm just being completely misogynist about and delusional?
No, this is absolutely the truth. And it's so clear to see. A lot of these mothers, as far as these trans kids that have kind of been propelled into the media and are the faces of it. There's one on Time Magazine with pink hair a few years ago. There's documentaries made about these kids. The parents assume this role of like, they brand themselves as these activists. And I guess the argument can be made, well, if you have a trans kid, then you're going to feel passionate about it, similar to you would any other kind of thing. But I think there's something inherently problematic about assuming that identity for yourself as a parent as well, because what happens is you're making it harder for the child to come to the realization that they made a mistake, and you have to leave that room. There's a documentary called Transhood on HBO Max. And there was this one kid who had all the signs of being trans, had the same signs as me, frankly, grew up wanting to play with Barbies and whatever. They went by a girl name, started dressing like a girl at school. This went on for years, from like age like 4 to 9. The kid then said, actually, I'm a boy. I don't want to do this anymore. This was after years of the mother, doing interviews, becoming a little bit of a public figure herself, branding herself on Instagram, having a documentary made. So it's like breaking the fourth wall there. And the mother didn't want to let the kid go back. The mother wanted the kid to remain a trans girl. And actually in the interview was talking about how deeply upsetting it was. Whereas the dad was like excited, which of course fathers need they need to take on a bigger role in these kids' lives too. It's always the moms. I don't know why that is.
Don't you think this, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but don't you think this is basically the left-wing version of being a pageant mom?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the same kind of dynamic socially.
Absolutely. But it's like, it entails so much darker stuff. I mean, these kids, like once they get to the age where they are medicalized, they can't come back from it. And then for what? So the mom could have a spotlight. And this isn't always the case. There's a woman named Kim Petras. She's trans. She's like a trans pop star. She transitioned at a very young age. I've met her. She by all means seems like a happy, successful person. The transition worked out. Great. That's not the case. What's happening with kids now anymore. And it's really bad. It's really, really scary, because I think it's going to come down on trans adults eventually, like I said.
What sorts of reactions have you gotten, when you decided to come out as trans to your friends and family?
I don't think I had one friend say anything negative. Half my family disowned me. The other half I'm still cool with. My mom's side, my dad's side disowned me. They really struggle with it. They're very deeply conservative. They're not even Christian, but they're very deeply conservative, and they just do not get it. They're older, which is fine. That's something you have to kind of accept. But that's the problem, right? Or that's the issue, is that people are going so hard in the acceptance and the support to sort of make up for decades of like complete ostracization, families disowning these people. But the problem is you're leaning into glorification of something that has so many pitfalls, because human beings just have this thing about them where they're not able to either they're not able to just look at it like this is an issue and we have to look at it seriously. It has to be, we either love trans people or we fucking hate them. And that's why people have a hard time understanding why I exist in the right-wing sphere and why I've had that be my career for the past 6 years. But it's like, I don't know. I'd rather win over right-wingers who are much more likely to be like, okay, she's fine, it's a trans person, whatever, than like the lefties who are supporting 12-year-olds having their breasts cut off. This is not a question of like the lesser of two evils for me. It's just clear as day to see.
Okay, here's another one. You're a dude. Referring to you as she is a lie. And by doing that, it's basically the slippery slope to causing kids to get unnecessary surgeries and be pumped full of hormones. How is that
so
wrong?
Dramatic? I feel like, do people go around and going up to, kids that are adopted and being, it's a lie to call that your mom, she didn't birth you. That's a lie to call that your dad, he didn't give birth to you. I think it's a bit dramatic. I mean, this, we hang out all the time. You've never seen anyone call me he. ever. You've never seen anyone interact with me in that way, because it doesn't actually make sense. Well, you do, because you're crazy, but also because you're allowed to do that, because we're close. But the reality is, it's more of a lie if you think about it, to like sit across from me and be like, I have to say he. And that's why the right wingers that try to do it, this is why a lot of them ignore me, by the way, and try to pretend I don't exist, because they don't want to get caught up in using pronouns. But the ones that have had me on their shows, there are some of them that like really flip-flop on it. Like even like the Candace Owens debate, where she's like full of hatred for me in a way that no one ever has been, right? And we're in this heated combative moment. Like one of the biggest memes to come out of that was that she couldn't actually keep the pronoun straight. Like she tried her best to call me he. She really tried, but she kept saying she.
It would just interrupt to clarify, add some context. What Blaire is referring to is, what year was this?
2017,
I don't remember.
5 years.
In 2017, both Blaire and Candace were kind of wet behind the ears, starting their careers as commentators. Candace was still referring to herself as Red Pill Black, I think was her handle on Twitter. Blaire was this new young right of center trans woman. They had a debate on the Rubin Report. It was one of the biggest train wrecks in YouTube history. I highly encourage everyone to go and watch it. Our buddy Raka Raka Ali even made a little video about it, set to music called Guys, Guys, Guys. And basically within 5 minutes, I think it was, I think Candace sits down and says, just to clarify, I don't want people thinking this is a cat fight. This is a grown man I'm sitting across from. And it was all downhill from there.
I was so gagged because no one's ever done that to me. But the reality, to the point we were just making, is like, if she really felt that way, you know, strongly enough to make that the center stage of this, you know, interview that we're both doing, or this debate or whatever, then she probably should have been able to do that the whole time. You know, like, I'm not flip-flopping on any issues mid-interview. I'll maybe change mine over time, but like mid-interview, you don't go to like, this is a man, to she, to he, to she, to he.
Oh, is that true? She kept switching?
She kept saying she. And that was one of the things that people like dragged her for the most, was like, you made this whole thing about calling her a man, and then throughout the whole interview, you're saying she like 65% of the time. So, you know, that's the point. So I understand that people, when they do the whole, like, I can't call any trans person he or she, doesn't matter how well they pass or whatever. I understand people who have that position for the simple sake of they're reacting to sort of all the people that use this issue of pronouns to control them. They use that language to control them. They use the they, thems and the zers, and it is literally just a political thing. But sitting down at, you know, and this is what I got Ben Shapiro to admit to when I did my debate with him on my channel, which was also so long ago. Oh my God, I've lived so many lives. But he even said, like, yeah, I would never say he if I was like in a social setting with you. It wouldn't actually make sense. So is it a lie if it makes sense to do? Like, I don't know, maybe it is, but are all lies bad? You don't correct yourself in calling someone's adopted mother their mother because they're not technically their biological mother.
Well, I think the bigger another argument for that, first of all, you're not pretending you're not biologically male, so it's not a lie in the sense that that you're trying to get over. Right. But the other argument, and this is something that applies to everyone, is ghostwriters. So someone will have, you know, Matthew McConaughey on their show, or Megyn Kelly, or Bill O'Reilly, or anyone as the author of the book. They didn't write the book. And the host knows that the person didn't write the book. These books are all ghostwritten. I think it's literally over 99%. I can name the ones who aren't. Joan Collins, I know, did her own, Belinda Carlisle, but like literally any other book. And this is just people can look it up themselves. You go to the acknowledgements, it'll say, I want to thank, you know, Jeff Smith, who helped me so much preparing this manuscript. Jeff Smith is the one who wrote the book. Trump is open about having had a ghostwriter for Are the Deal. The guy came out against him. Hillary's ghostwriters are known. If you're a celebrity, you're not even gonna have time or the technical skill to write a book, yet everyone feels comfortable pretending that this person is the author. Now, the reason why they feel more comfortable with that is it doesn't involve children, and it doesn't involve me having to change my life or accommodate this. You know, it's not really a big issue. This is being something that's so pushed, especially at the corporate level, that I think people feel the need, and I can understand why, to dig in their heels, be like, okay, I got to draw the line somewhere, because at a certain point, you're just going to be out of polite society just because I'm not buying into your latest book.
Oh, I understand totally. And you look at the trajectory of, you know, activism within the LGBT world in general over the past decade, and it's so crazy to think that we ever even were debating about cakes. You know what I mean? It's like now you're at like drag queen story hour, where the drag queen is literally a convicted pedophile, reading to kids, and the left is just silent about it. You have, Leah Thomas, the trans athlete. But this is why I feel like it is so important for people to understand that there are actually.
I can't tell you how many times we've had situations at the stadium where.
What?
Brett?
Stacey, I'm quitting my job and becoming a producer.
Brett?
Yes, I'm here.
We can hear you.
Sorry about that.
I think you should keep it in.
Yeah, definitely keep it in.
That was so ratchet.
I feel like I'm back at Gas Digital. Blaire, you were saying, I'm sorry, about Leah Thomas and people digging in their heels.
Okay, yes, I understand. I understand the digging in of the heels because I dig my own heels in. Like, you don't think when I see Leah Thomas's big ass, like, just so brazenly, like, hurting women that I want to be like, this is a whole fucking man. Like, I do. And sometimes I might even do that. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for people to understand, like I said, on the right, that have this misconception that trans people are not an invention of the left. They are being co-opted by the left. They're absolutely the Leah Thomases of the world. There are the Jessica Eves of the world. There are the people that are doing real harm under the guise of trans. But that's why one of the main things that I really push in all of my content and everything I do is telling people within the trans community, like, please just speak out against it because it's not that hard. It's not that hard to draw the line at 12-year-olds having their tits cut off. It's not that hard to draw the line at big ass Leah Thomas destroying women in sports. These are very simple corrections to make. But the unfortunate thing is every hill politically for the left is a hill to die on. There's no compromise at all. And so you have this train that's just going so far, and it's not even just with the trans stuff. It's like now you have, pedophilia being like made into its own sexual orientation. They have a flag, they have a politically correct term. There are professors getting caught teaching this stuff, or at least talking about this stuff all the time now, because there's no brakes on the train. And the tactic by the corporate press is to gaslight you into thinking that it's not actually happening. So one of the things is I've been pretty outspoken against the drag queen performances for kids recently. And this is something you and I have talked about because you're a fan of Drag Race and all that, and you agree it's not for kids either. But
and I tell people, so I get asked this a lot, how I can love drag. I love transgressive art. I'm using it in a very loose sense. I'm not talking about Picasso or Michelangelo here. I just mean performance, something that's thought-provoking. Drag queens are historically about upsetting people, and because it is only a man in a dress in 2022 who could get away with wearing a swastika like Sharon Needles does, performing in blackface like RuPaul does, dressing like John Benet Ramsey like Milk does. And there was a drag queen who got in trouble because there was some kind of talent show and she performed as a suicide bomber with a hijab and a vest full of dynamite. That's the kind of thing where it gets people to freak out that I appreciate because they're pushing the envelope. None of that is for kids. This is late at night for people who are high or drunk or who are like really, really edgy humor. And to have it be Disneyfied and put for like young moms, to me, is as crazy as having a Chippendales dancer, with his little bow tie and pecs, having a kid on his lap, or a stripper. No one's going to say strippers shouldn't exist. They don't respect them particularly, but they're not like, okay, you want to go, but to bring that into the classroom or the library, even though that's standard, heterosexuality, it's what does one thing have to do with the other? It's literally night and day. This is nighttime stuff, not daytime stuff.
100%. But what happens is, and I know this as someone who, I've been tweeting about this. I did a video about this, and I've gotten a lot of attention from the people who defend this. So they found it and they're coming at me. And what they say is, well, why are you saying drag is sexual? And then they'll respond with pictures of drag queens that are not at all sexual, because they don't always present sexually, and not every drag performance is sexual. However, there are sexual undertones all the time. This is still a man with his balls tucked inside his body. But this is still, the humor that's employed at drag shows is often very, very crude. You can't go to a drag show without a mention of a penis. You can't, whether it's a joke, whether it's a story, whether it's an object, anything. So what they do until they can't do it anymore is gaslight you into telling you that it's not happening. They will have you believing that you are crazy for thinking there's a problem with it. It is happening, and these kids really are going to it. But the reason why these white liberal moms are so obsessed with it, because it does one thing for them, if nothing else. It communicates, I am not at all conservative. It communicates, I am on this side. It communicates, I am not on the right. And that's what they want to do. But unfortunately, they're using their kids to do it, which I don't know if there was some massive example of this on the right, I would criticize that as well. I don't like kids being used in politics. And I guess maybe now that I'm thinking about it, something kind of comparable would be like a lot of people on the right will like take pictures with their little kids, like 4 or 5-year-olds holding guns and stuff. But, and I could see why that would be distasteful to people on the left. I could see why that would enrage them, but still, I don't think that's particularly scarring in the same way that having like, I don't know, like a drag queen thrusting in front of you in underwear is.
If you lead or manage a software team, you know setting your team up for success is not easy. Employee turnover, the speed of innovation, timeline delays, security concerns, they're all constantly clouding our vision. Leading technology teams around the world trust Pluralsight to bring skill development and engineering insights to the forefront of the developer experience, increasing productivity, efficiency, satisfaction, and retention. It's the clarity teams need to tackle mission-critical projects, drive cloud transformation, or simply ship scalable and secure code. Harness the collective power of hindsight, foresight, and insight with Pluralsight. Check us out today at pluralsight.com/vision. Hey guys, underwear model and official alpha male hunk Michael Malice here, and I want to talk to you about Sheath underwear, which is the underwear I wear every single day without fail, even somehow when I'm going commando. What makes Sheath underwear so great? Well, let me tell you. They've got this dual pouch system, which has one pouch for one part of your male anatomy, another part for another part of your male anatomy. And you put it on the first time and you were like, this is kind of weird to have my underwear gripping me down there. But I'm going to tell you, it is the most comfortable underwear you're ever going to wear. It's great when it's hot outside. It's great when there's no sticking, no chafing. It keeps you nice and tight. These boxer briefs are the best. They've got some new additions. They got a mesh one. They got a bamboo one. And they have the limited edition Michael Malice Dynamite pair, which you're definitely going to want to wear. All you got to do is go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, and you get 20% off, and you can get inside my pants, and you get one step closer to going higher on that alpha male hierarchy, which all my listeners like. Now, they also have a line for women, but since women don't listen to this show, that is of no relevance. All you got to do is go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice to get 20% off. Support the underwear that supports you and supports the show. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, let's talk about gaslighting. Here's the other criticism. You're just mentally ill, right? And
True.
for people to sit and validate your mental illness doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help society. And it's just making more and more people go down the rabbit hole of normalizing mental illness.
I'm absolutely mentally ill. I think that being trans is 100% a mental illness. I don't think that that means that people have to be excluded from society because of that. I think if it's a mental illness that does not entail like violence or harming someone else, I mean, we're not pushing out people that are autistic or people that have severe social anxiety. And you're not like yelling at a person with severe social anxiety's face that they're, a weakling and like shouldn't be allowed to be out because they're embarrassing everyone because they're so anxious. It's like, it literally comes down to, is this person harming someone else or are they not? And I don't think that just existing as me is harming anyone. If anything, I mean, we can take me out of it and just the average trans person. But for me, it's like, I'm pushing back on the same shit. So who am I really harming? I don't know. I think it's also much more powerful to push back on this shit coming from a trans person, not for nothing. Like,
calm down, Toots, you're hysterical.
Little bit. I was going to use you as an example here. So you are incredibly accomplished. You have a devoted audience. You have swayed people on a lot of things. You communicate these topics you care about in a way that moves people. I don't think you could move people on the trans or the LGBT issue in remotely the same way that I could, or with the same amount of effectiveness. So, I mean, they can pretend as if they're going to make any headway fighting against this without actual LGBT people's help. But I think that, a lot of the LGBT people in the political space on the right are doing so much more than just the people who want to throw out the entire concept of trans or being gay or being bi or whatever. You think of Ariel Scarcella, you think of me, Buck Angel, Caitlyn Jenner on Fox News. People love to hate her, but I mean, she kind of single-handedly solved the trans athlete thing. Like, they're making corrections, I think, based on the fact that Caitlyn was so outspoken. She's the most famous trans person in the world. So I just think it's more effective coming from us.
There was it a Vice or HBO, I think, a special that you did was a big group of people. Which was Vice, right?
Yeah.
It was Vice.
It was on HBO, but
on
yeah.
HBO. It was produced by Vice. And there was a person there who I think they identified as either non-binary or gender fluid. I regard those terms as largely interchangeable, although I'm sure there's people who make some distinction between them. And it was basically someone who was clearly biologically male, but who had like some lipstick on and some like asymmetrical hair
and a goatee.
And a goatee. And you flat out said, you who were cast as the villain, flat out said to them, "You're not trans." And the person couldn't handle it anymore. They literally, I think, clutched their chest and like, I can't even talk. Why did you feel comfortable saying that? And what did you mean by that? And what is your view about the difference between trans and non-binary?
So why did I feel comfortable doing that? I guess I'm just kind of a bitch. I mean, they were absolutely right to cast me as the villain. I'm used to it. This is what I do. Like when I do these like group things, it's always like the one right of center person and then a fucking, in this case, it was a group of like 10 lefties. And I'm like, okay, well then I kind of have to go hard. I can't sit here and be timid. I'm against 10 people. There's a few other people on the right there, but they weren't as outspoken as me. So that situation was crazy because in true like Vice fashion, or whenever you're filming like a television show or anything with producers who are not in your favor, I don't know if they told people to do this to me, but the entire time people sitting around me were like saying things under their breath towards me and really frustrating me for about an hour. So there was a guy sitting next to me. I forget his name. What's so funny?
It's just funny because it's just I doubt that they needed to be told, because I think that type of person is just always champing at the bit to say something. They can't wait to get their 2 cents in, which you and I can relate to.
Yeah. And you know me, you've seen me in certain situations where I like take a lot. And then like, once I just can't take it anymore, I just fucking blow up. And that's kind of how it was. There was someone sitting next to me who was like, he was like whispering in my ear, like, you know, you're wrong for that, right? You know, that was really messed up for you to say that, right? I can't believe you did that. You're going to look so bad on here. And so eventually I was just like, you know what, let me just go off. The non-binary thing. I think it's different quite literally in the sense that it's non-binary, where it's like being trans is binary. Like I went from male to female, but that's one to the other. And it's crazy how people can allow and understand all this nuance under the LGBT umbrella. So you have like pansexual, which is like functionally the same thing as bisexual. Let's just be really honest about that. But if you say that, you're going to get dragged. But if I say that being non-binary is different than being trans, despite the fact that they are quite literally opposite, suddenly I'm the bad person. But I'm comfortable being the bad person. Like I see the way all these other trans influencers, you know, will be in my DMs agreeing with me on these issues and then publicly want to throw me under the bus or just join the herd because it is what helps them get by. I'm not really interested in getting by. I'm interested in saying what I feel. So it is what it is.
So here's another criticism you get, and I'm excited to ask you about this because I don't think anyone has before. Do you denounce fully Nazism, or are you basically a closet Nazi?
I guess no one's asked me it because it's such a crazy question. Of course,
well, you get called a Nazi every 5 minutes, don't you?
Well, of course I do, but I mean that's kind
of course, like, of course, this trans woman gets called a Nazi. Yeah, of course.
Well, in this climate, it's of course because if you're even slightly right of center, you're going to get called that. Do you get called that a lot or no?
It's sometimes, but it's really funny because I was on the Jewish channel and I was wearing a blue shirt with a white blazer, which is the colors of Israel, and I had my hair in horns, like the Jewish stereotype. And the background is like Netanyahu, whatever, and the Israeli flag. So whenever they call me a Nazi, I just throw up that picture and they don't know what to do with it.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I mean,
actually, they don't care. They'll just double down. They'll be like, there were some Jewish Nazis. And I have this line. I've never used it, but in another context, I would if there was like a civilized discussion. To divorce anti-Nazism from anti-Semitism is a low-key Holocaust denial. This was a central aspect of Nazism. This informed them very heavily. So pretend you could separate the two is really, and anti-gypsy and anti-gay, you know, they're a list, but pretend that it's just like being hateful as opposed to specifically targeting a population is just a historical inaccuracy. But they don't care.
That's a really, really good point. The Nazi shit's crazy because people love to, whenever I see people using that against me, they like to say, well, look at who her friends are. Michael, you know, I don't have friends. So these people think.
Yeah, but then but Nazis don't either. No one wants to be friends with Nazis.
Oh no, they have friends.
That proves that you're a Nazi.
But their friends are a bunch of other Nazis.
Okay.
Yeah, so they think like, well, you're friends with this, and this person. And I'm like, simply by virtue of being on the internet, right of center, I am friends with someone who's like so much further right than me. Even if I've like, I don't know, like been mentioned in a tweet with them or whatever, it's like, that means I am them. That's crazy. That doesn't mean that they are trans because they're acting with a trans person. Like, that's just fucking nuts. So yeah, the idea that it's because of who my friends are, it's like, my friends are like, I have like you and like one other person.
Well, you're not very likable. Let's talk about just briefly. You moved to Austin same day as I did. You moved from LA. I moved from New York. Austin is obviously a blue city, but it's a blue city. By the way, people who say that Austin is like basically the San Francisco of Texas might be correct, but it is the San Francisco of Texas, but it's not at all close to San Francisco culturally. That's just kind of completely nonsensical. What has been your experience like here in terms of, you know, being a trans woman as opposed to your experience like in Los Angeles?
Oh yeah, we've talked about this. I've never been, this is what's so crazy. So when I announced I'm moving to Texas, I did a video about it. The video went kind of viral. And there was this big sort of like discussion about like, well, how could she feel comfortable moving to Texas as a trans person when Texas has all this anti-trans stuff going on, people that don't like her, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, first of all, I knew that was bullshit simply by virtue of like, I know I have a lot of fans in Texas. In fact, it's my biggest fan base in the country. And you know, we get recognized all the time here, way more than LA. I've never been treated more like just a regular girl than in Texas. There's literally no trans stuff here as far as like people making a distinction how they treat me. I mean, obviously people know and whatever, but like in LA, it's actually the opposite. In LA, I was very much living this like trans lifestyle. Like I was Blaire White, the trans woman. Like that was my thing. That's how people saw me and treated me. Whereas here, I'm just a regular girl. So like men talk over me. I don't know, just all kinds of stuff. It's just different.
Let's just ask this. What advice would you give toward parents having to navigate this stuff in public schools?
God, from what angle? Like they have a trans kid, or they're
no,
like...
meaning like there are a lot of parents who I would say are understandably concerned that their kids are being, you know, fed some of this dogma. I heard one story, and one of my favorite things, and let's get this in a wholesome context, is kid logic. I remember when I was a kid, you know, I was scared to go to sleep. So my parents would leave the light on in the kitchen, and I would worry because that would mean the electric bill would be through the roof, you know, because kid logic, electricity is very expensive. And in my head, they left the light on all night, not realizing they turned it off as soon as I go to sleep, right? So there was another story I heard, which makes perfect sense, where this little kid got taught this in school, and he came home worried that he's going to wake up tomorrow, he's going to be a girl. Because in kid logic, that they're trying to have it make sense in their own little brains. So parents who are concerned that kids are going to be told these things, they're not going to have the capacity to process it. Again, when you're a kid, you think a girl is someone who plays with other girls, or maybe plays with dolls, and a boy is, you know, whatever, rough houses. So what would you tell those parents?
My God. I mean, I feel like I have actually a bit of an extreme view on public schools. Like I actually think we could do away with it entirely. My mom works in a public school, and it's actually quite a decent one. And the crap that she tells me that goes on in that school, and just the level of like, it's just insane.
Can you give me one example?
Yeah. So my mom deals with a lot of kids who come in and they're dealing with a lot of abuse at home, and those kids go and they bully the crap out of other kids. And I dealt with that going to public school. I fought my whole life. And you do have, and she's told me as well that, because she's in California, that she's seeing all this stuff in the curriculum as well, the trans and non-binary, the whatever. And she is kind of lived out, like she's just, it's so crazy that I had a trans child, and then I'm seeing this years later in the curriculum. Isn't this great? I'm like, do you watch my videos, Mom? I don't think this is great. But my advice to answer your question is, if you can homeschool your kids, I actually think you should, or send them to a private school that you know isn't engaging in this, even though some of them still are. And then the second thing would be, have just like a real conversation with them and tell them, like, listen, this content that you're being fed in school is entirely political. And when you're older, you're going to understand that these things have agendas behind them. There's people that are dishonest about these things. But to also like raise them to respect people. Like there's this misconception that you have to be teaching kids about all this crazy gender shit because it results in them not being hateful towards trans people later in life, or gay people, lesbian people, whatever. I don't think those two things go hand in hand. I actually think it probably is going to be a bit of the opposite effect. Anything I was like force fed as a child, like I was force fed religion kind of at a young age, like I ended up rejecting it. So if anything, I think it's counterproductive to shove all this in the kids' faces. Just try to have a real talk with them and let them understand that it's political and that it's kind of like goes in and goes out. Like it's not always going to be like that.
Yeah, there's a Yale professor, Jason Stanley or something like that. And he had this tweet and he was talking about how he was kind of shocked because what he's been seeing, I don't know if it was, just colloquially or there's data, but his point was that what they're seeing is when people are being forced in corporations to take racial identity training or like racial sensitivity training. And not in the case of like, hey, if someone has an accent or their weirdly pronounced name, you should make fun of them, which I think we could all wrap our heads around. That person with an accent speaks two languages, you speak one, and doesn't mean they're unintelligent. But as a result of this kind of idea that every white person is inherently racist and you have to stand up in front of the room and say, I'm racist, even though you make it a point to treat people, equitably and fairly. As a result of this, it's turning people into full-blown like white nationalists and very much white identitarian, because they're like, if you're forcing me to choose to think of myself in these terms, I'm going to choose my family over yours, and it's not going to be a hard choice. And it's this huge kind of backlash that's happening, and because in their heads, all human beings are infinitely malleable, and if you sit down and you train people a certain way, people are just going to follow orders. And the biggest result of that they should have learned from was the Trump election, where a lot of people thought Trump was an ass, but they were told for a year and a half, you cannot under any circumstances vote for this person, it's completely unacceptable. And they're like, hey, you know what, I'm an American, so I do what I want, and I'm just going to do this to give you a finger. And that ended up happening, and it's still happening now in other contexts.
Right, but this also goes back to what I said at the top of this interview, which is the stats about LGBT acceptance declining. If all this activism was for the better,
right,
if it really resulted in more people being kinder to each other and it didn't involve like the kids getting funneled into the medical decisions or whatever, I would probably be all for it if it was producing those results, but it's simply not. It's resulting in the opposite. And I get it. I have a 16-year-old nephew who's in high school, and during 2020, instead of doing the Pledge of Allegiance, for a while they're making them kneel to BLM.
No.
Yes. So you're making these kids assume these political identities. Do you think that that's like something permanent? Do you think that they're going to be like, well, in sixth grade, I had this shoved down my throat, so I'm going to stay this way as an adult? It's probably going to be the opposite, which in a way does work out for someone who votes on the other side, but it still does a lot of damage to these kids. Like when my nephew told me that, I was like, what are you joking? It's also so much worse in schools, by the way, than people really understand. I think, lockdowns and COVID and virtual school let people in on that a little bit, but I think it's a lot worse when they're back in schools and have these teachers right in front of their faces. Because these teachers also hide a lot. I mean, it's crazy because I never imagined I'd be in a place where I'm like demonizing teachers or speaking ill of teachers, but like, it's hard to not see what's happening and just feel like these teachers in these public schools, not all, but like hashtag not all, but like so many of them are just fucking trash, and they're throwing up all this trash on these kids.
Blaire, we're running out of time.
Okay.
What has been your favorite part of this interview?
I think just doing a round two. It's been really fun. Just can you do it?
You are welcome.
There's been scandal on planet Earth ever since Adam and Eve went apple picking. I'm Tom Zenner, creator and co-host of the 1 Degree of Scandalous podcast. My co-host is the world's foremost authority on what can happen when you're caught up in the epicenter of a salacious scandal, since he was involved in the biggest scandal of all time.
Well, okay, yes, Tom, I am Kato Kalin, America's favorite house guest, and guess what? I can finally afford to live on my own couch. You know, my life is so much less complicated, I've noticed. You know, Tom and I can't wait to take you inside every major scandal that's happened in the past 50 years or so and get the juicy details from the people who, just like me, had their world turned upside down.
Americans are obsessed with scandal, and thankfully, celebrities, politicians, athletes, and pop culture icons are equally obsessed with creating them for us.
The world is crazy, people. It's crazy, but remember, it could be worse. It could be you in the middle of a messy scandal. So celebrate the fact that you get to hear about the most famous scandals in history and the ones happening in the news right now, right this very second. Now!
Join Kato Kalin and me, Tom Zenner, for 1 Degree of Scandalous, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.